Hi, I am Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
The winter of '89 had settled over London with a dour insistence, laying its damp fingers upon the stones of Bloomsbury and wreathing the river in a sour grey that neither daybreak nor gaslight could fully disperse. It was upon such a morning, when even the hansoms moved like beasts reluctant to stir, that a message of singular urgency arrived for my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes. The envelope, costly and blue, bore a crest impressed in silver. The hand that addressed it had blotted twice, testimony of agitation in one who was accustomed to command. Holmes broke the seal with languid precision, glanced at the sheet, and passed it to me across the breakfast things. "If you please, Watson." The note was brief, but eloquent in the way a telegram can be eloquent. Sir Alistair Penmorah, Baronet, financier, and the principal patron of the Royal Lyceum Opera, implored Holmes to attend him without delay at that venerable edifice on Bow Street. A calamity, he wrote, had occurred in the watches of the night, a death of the most inexplicable character. And the reputation of the house, as well as interests dear to the Crown, stood imperilled should the matter become the sport of gossip. Holmes had been fashioning an airy tower from breadcrumbs, the which he now disassembled with a sigh. "You observe, Watson, that he does not say murder, only death, and yet he alarms himself about gossip. He fears scandal first, justice second. That is the note of the impresario." "He is not the impresario," said I, recalling some society column. "Sir Alistair is patron and purse." "Then the impresario will appear presently, full of theatrical remorse and practical economies," Holmes returned, smiling. He rose, his eyes brightening as a war-horse pricks its ears at the roll of the drum. "Coat, Watson, the fog will do the rest." The Royal Lyceum Opera, stately, respectable, and better endowed than inspired, presented that morning a façade as expressionless as a banker's. A constable stood at the stage door, and beyond him the ashen corridors that smell of grease paint and damp scenery opened like the passages of a tomb. The house, we learned, had been dark the previous evening for the rehearsal of a new production, a medieval drama whose title I have no wish to recall for reasons which shall be plain. We were received in a draughty green room by Sir Alistair himself, a tall gentleman with cheeks that had once been florid and were now mottled by a night of fright. With him hovered Mr. Fabian Rook, the impresario, a brisk, narrow man who carried anxiety the way an officer carries a swagger stick, always in hand, never laid aside. "It is a disaster, Mr. Holmes," Sir Alistair began, his voice quivering in the strings. "A ghastly business. The newspapers must be forestalled. Do you hear? Forestalled until you have given me some rational account which I may furnish to them." "My dear Sir Alistair," said Holmes, "newspapers are like influenza. They prefer to find one first and then travel of their own accord. Let us be rational before we are eloquent. What has happened?" Rook replied with professional concision. "At 5:30 this morning," said he, "our night watchman, Amos Keel, discovered the body of Maestro Vittorio Cardini upon the stage. The house had been closed since 9 the previous evening when I myself left. There was no performance last night, only the afternoon rehearsal which concluded at 4. We dismissed the chorus and the orchestra before 5. Cardini remained, as was his custom, to fuss with his scores and to squabble with the electrician about the atmosphere of Act 2. "The electrician?" Holmes inquired. "Mr. Dacre, responsible for limelight and effects. He states he left at 6:15. "And in the interval?" said Holmes. Rook spread his hands. "No one else, to my knowledge, was upon the stage or in the pit. The stage door was locked at 9 by Keel, the watchman, with the keys returned to their hooks. The main doors were secured by the porter shortly after. Yet the maestro lies dead upon the boards, Mr. Holmes, and God's own angels cannot tell me how any murderer came in or out." Sir Alistair shuddered. "The man was to premiere our season next fortnight. You comprehend our position." Holmes indicated that we should be shown the scene. I confess that even my rather practised nerves suffered a disagreeable seizure as we stepped from the wings into that great hollow of the stage. There is something unearthly in a theatre, bereft of its audience, where curtains hang like shrouds and the music desks yawn empty as tombs. The gas jets burned low, the painted scenery, some gloomy cloister, stood arrested in a motion more ghostly than any life. Cardini lay near the forest-edge, between conductor's stand and the prompter's box. He was a compact Italian of middle years, with a springy thatch of iron-grey hair and features stamped by the passions of his art. He wore a dark frock coat and waistcoat. His silk cravat had been twisted awry, and one glove was missing. The head was inclined slightly, as if to listen. The eyes, half open, had a peculiar film as of surprise that had not yet resolved itself into fear. No wound presented itself to my examination save for a faint bruise upon the temple, crescent-shaped and not deep. There was no blood. "Medical opinion?" Holmes asked, glancing at me. "Too early to speak," said I, kneeling. "The skin is chill but not cold, rigour scarcely established. He has been dead, I should judge, some 3 or 4 hours, perhaps a little more. No obvious fractures. The bruise might proceed from a fall." "An opera conductor who falls upon an empty stage, the world will call it irony," Holmes murmured, then motioned to Keel, the watchman, a big-shouldered fellow with the look of one who slept poorly and trusted worse. "Your rounds?" Holmes said simply. Keel scratched at his jaw. 8 and 10 o'clock, sir, inside and out. Then midnight. Then 2. Nothing out of order. At 4, I had my tea in the porter's box. At 5:30, I lit the side jets on stage to see a thing I thought I heard. There he was, like that. Doors were locked. Keys were where they ought. No one passed. Holmes's pale eyes had already begun their measuring dance. He moved like a man counting bars in a silent score, pacing the distances between prompter's box and footlights, conductor's stand and trap. He stooped to the conductor's desk, upon which lay a sheaf of music lightly dusted with the fine powder of the stage. The top page bore the title Finale Act 2. In the margin, written in a small precise hand, had been set a curious notation, 3 tiny crosses above the treble staff and a bracket embracing a bar of silence. "Who copied these parts?" Holmes asked, almost idly. Rook frowned. "Cardini employed a copyist, a certain Miss Thora Bell, reliable as a metronome." "And the missing glove?" Holmes inquired. At this, Mr. Rook started. "Missing?" Holmes pointed without looking. Cardini's right hand, bare, the left still gloved. Rook could only spread his hands again, a harried Caesar, abdicating. Lestrade arrived as we made our circuit, a brisk little man with a rat-like acuteness that had often incurred Holmes's affectionate derision. "Morning, Mr. Holmes, Doctor. Nasty piece of business, what? I should have known to find you here. There's a whiff of the baffling about it." He bobbed to Sir Alistair. "We'll keep it quiet as far as decency allows." "You will keep it utterly quiet?" Sir Alistair snapped, but his authority rang hollow in that cavern. Holmes's attention had fallen now to the floor. The stage, I observed, had been dusted with a thin coat of chalk the previous day, a common practice, Rook explained, to deaden slipperiness for the dancers. Upon this faint film, any step would proclaim itself. And yet the area around Cardini bore no trace of recent disturbance, save his own neat shoe prints leading from the wings to the conductor's stand. There were no other marks. Even my own tracks stood out like accusations. "Well, Lestrade," said Holmes, What theory have we to rest the reporters upon when they rattle your rails? Lestrade inclined his head towards the bruise. "A fall, pure and simple. The man stays late, fusses at his music, takes a turn upon the stage to listen for the echo, as these foreign gentlemen love to do, slips upon the dust, cracks his head, and never rises. The locked doors and the clean floor tell me as much. Your case is your own, Sir Alister. You've only to mourn him." Holmes examined the conductor's stand more closely. He lifted the top sheet, then another, then stilled his hand. The third page, I saw, had been torn at the corner very neatly, as if a single bar of music had been excised with a sharp blade. Holmes's long forefinger touched the cut edge, then drifted to Cardini's breast pocket, where lay a stub of blue carpenter's pencil and a small folding knife, closed. Cardini was tidy even in his untidiness, Holmes observed. He does not tear paper with a knife and then return the blade unopened. Rook blinked. "What are you implying?" "Nothing." Holmes's gaze ascended to the flies and the black maw of the gridiron, ropes, pulleys, and anonymous darkness. "Only that an empty opera house is seldom empty." From the pit came a small metallic clatter. We turned as one. Keel, who had ventured to the conductor's rostrum, had knocked a baton from the desk. It fell into the well and rang upon something hollow. Holmes leaned over the lip of the stage and peered into the sombre trench. "With your leave," he said, and vaulted down as agile as a cat. He was lost to us for a moment among chairs and music stands. And then his voice floated up, very calm. "Watson, be good enough to bring your lantern. Here is a mark that our friend Lestrade's theory will not so easily digest." I fetched the lantern from the wing, and together we descended to the pit. Holmes knelt by the third desk of the first violins, where the dust lay strangely patterned. There, upon the wooden lip of the music stand, someone had pressed a thumb in the chalk, deliberately, firmly, leaving a print that might have been taken in a police office. The whirls clear as a map. Above it, pencilled in a minute hand upon the score, stood 3 letters that at that instant meant nothing to me. N.C. Holmes's eyes were alight, yet his mouth was grave. "You see, Watson, our maestro did not fall alone. He had company, and the company wished us to think he had none." He blew softly upon the chalk, and the print trembled, but held. "A theatre, my dear fellow, is a palace of effects. And we have here one more effect than an accident would require." Holmes rose from his crouch like a violinist who had found his theme. He signalled to Keel to keep all hands from the pit, then mounted the stage beside me. "Mr. Rook," said he, "who remains in the building?" "The porter, myself, Keel, and the seamstress," the impresario answered. "A few of the chorus arrive at 9. I have warned the rest away. I shall see the electrician, Mr. Dacre, and Miss Thora Bell. Till then, the stage carpenter, if you please." Rook dispatched Keel. Lestrade, arms folded, had the affronted patience of a man whose tidy theory had been asked to stand in a draught. "Thumb marks and initials," he sniffed. "Actors' pranks." Holmes drifted to the conductor's desk. His gaze lingered upon the torn corner, then travelled to the prompter's box. He examined its lip with a lens. "Watson," he said, "observe the faint semicircle of powder. That is the mark of a glove laid down and lifted again. Our missing glove, likely placed while someone did a delicate business with paper, a bare thumb in the pit, a gloved hand above." A burly figure in a leather apron appeared from the wings. "George Hobson, head carpenter," he announced. Holmes's questions were brisk. Were any traps open last night? Ropes shifted? Weights awry? Hobson declared the stage had been left safe. Only the central trap had been raised during the afternoon call, and it had been shut and bolted at 5. He produced the iron key from his ring. "Then no assassin descended like a demon," Holmes mused. "And if he ascended like an angel, he left no feather." He begged the trap to be raised. We peered into a black square smelling of oil and damp timber. Dust lay on the joists, save for a narrow drag, as if a cord had been drawn and lifted. "Cue-bell rope," Hobson said. "Holmes, shut the trap. We will not waste time in the underworld. Our culprit worked in the light." Dacre, the electrician, arrived with a tradesman's briskness. He said he had quitted at 6:15 after setting calciums for Cardini's fancy and arguing about blue versus amber. Maestro wanted the cloister to look like moonstone, he grunted. "Keys?" asked Holmes. "Stage door key for my use," Dacre said, producing one. "Keel signs me out." "You say the maestro was superstitious. In what manner?" "Music scribbles," Dacre replied. "He marked 3 little crosses where he fancied the house breathed." The 3 crosses on the score flashed in my mind. Holmes's eyes gave a momentary glitter. Miss Thora Bell appeared shortly after, a slight young woman with steady grey eyes and a practical manner. She confirmed she had copied the parts and delivered the full score at noon. No page, to her knowledge, had been cut. "Write your initials," Holmes asked, offering his notebook. She did so, TB, distinct from the tiny NC in the pit. "And who is NC?" She hesitated. "Our new contralto, Nerissa Cole." Maestro favoured her. Rook made a sour face. "Favoured her beyond reason." "Where does Miss Cole lodge?" said Holmes. "At the Pomeroy in Maiden Lane," Rook supplied. Holmes signalled the body might be removed under Lestrade's authority, and we withdrew to the green room. Sir Alistair hovered like a man outside an operating theatre. "You have something, Mr. Holmes?" he asked. "A skeleton," Holmes returned. "The flesh must be fetched. Watson, we shall call upon Miss Cole. First, 5 minutes alone upon the stage." We left him. Presently he rejoined us, his hat brim powdered. He carried, tucked within the band, a broken sliver of hardened wax, such as limelight men use upon their screws. "Souvenir?" I asked. "Proof," he said softly. "Come, Watson, the Pomeroy awaits." The Pomeroy was one of those respectable houses that live on art's erratic purse. Miss Nerissa Cole received us with a hauteur that tried for tragedy and settled for temper. She was handsome in the dark, with eyes that I judged had practised disdain in cheaper mirrors. Holmes presented our cards. "You heard this morning's news?" "Mr. Rook called at 8. Maestro Cardini is dead." "Were you at the Opera House after rehearsal?" "Certainly not." "Yet Maestro Cardini favoured you." She allowed the faintest smile. "He wished to hear my chest notes in the cloister scene. That was at 3. I went home at 4. Holmes's glance flicked to a shelf where a pair of blue Italian gloves lay beside a roll of music. One glove was missing. "You have lost a glove, Miss Cole," she coloured. "I mislaid it." Holmes lifted the music. The title read, in Italian hand, Finale, Act 2. At the 3rd page, a corner had been cleanly excised. "Forgive me," said Holmes, returning it with a bow. "You shall not be asked to sing before breakfast. Another time will serve." Her eyes lost their hauteur and acquired caution. "Why should a corner of paper interest the police?" "Only because it interests you," Holmes replied. "Good morning." In the street he took my arm. "We have our first suspect and our first misdirection. The glove points, but the wax speaks." Holmes strode along the Strand with the purposeful gait that I had come to recognize as the rhythm of deduction in motion. His head was slightly bent, his long fingers interlaced behind his back, and his eyes were fixed not upon the crowd, but upon some theatre of the mind where the scattered pieces of the puzzle were already assembling themselves into a coherent scene. I matched his pace as best I could, for I knew that silence, more than chatter, drew out his reasoning at such moments. At length he spoke, his tone low but resonant. "You perceive, Watson, that the stage presented us with a contradiction, a locked house, a dead conductor, and no trace of ingress or egress. Lestrade, poor fellow, sees accident and is content, but the deliberate thumbprint, the excised corner of score, and the vanished glove all point away from the simplicity of chance. Someone was at pains to construct the semblance of solitude, and in so doing betrayed their presence." "And you believe that someone to be Miss Nerissa Cole?" I asked, recalling her hauteur, her faint disquiet, and that missing glove, so plainly resting in her lodgings. Holmes gave a thin smile. "Appearances, Watson, are the crudest tools of all. I do not yet know what role Miss Cole plays, but I am satisfied that she is no fool. Her pretence was too deliberate, her temper too conveniently summoned. She is either deeply implicated or the perfect scapegoat. Both are of value to the true culprit." We hailed a cab and were soon rattling back towards Baker Street. There, Holmes flung himself into his chair, steepled his fingers, and closed his eyes. I busied myself with notes, marvelling at the peculiar symbols he had sketched in my margin. Earlier, the 3 crosses on the music score reproduced with careful accuracy. After a quarter of an hour of silence, he sprang to his feet and began pacing. "Consider, Watson, a torn page. Why, to remove evidence, certainly, but of what? A note of music, or a note in words? Our conductor marked his margins freely, and Miss Bell, the copyist, swears that her version was intact. Therefore, the alteration was made after delivery. Cardini wrote something dangerous enough that it had to be cut away. And yet he had already signalled it by his crosses upon the staff. That was no musician's fancy, but a message in cipher. I must discover the key." His pacing ceased abruptly as the bell rang, and Mrs. Hudson entered with a card upon a tray. Holmes read it, his brows arching with interest. "Well, well, the fates oblige us, Watson. Admit the visitor." Into our sitting-room stepped a tall man with nervous eyes and a hesitant manner, whom Holmes introduced as Mr. Henry Dacre, the electrician we had briefly encountered at the opera. He carried in his hand a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," said he, his voice trembling slightly. "I scarce know why I have come, save that my conscience gave me no rest. Since leaving the theatre, I have recalled a circumstance which may bear upon poor Maestro Cardini's death." "Pray be seated, Mr. Dacre," Holmes said gently, though his gaze was sharp. "Tell us everything from the beginning, and leave nothing for your conscience to trouble you later." Dacre sat, clutching the parcel. "It was near 6 o'clock last evening. I was adjusting the lime jets in the flies when I saw Maestro Cardini below, speaking with a woman. The house was dark, but I am certain of her sex, her voice, her figure, the cloak she wore. They spoke heatedly. I could not catch the words. Presently she thrust something into his hand. He shook his head violently, and she flung away. I thought little of it at the time, save that the maestro was a man of passions. But now—" He swallowed. "Now I wonder if I should have spoken sooner." Holmes leaned forward, his grey eyes alight. "And this parcel?" Dacre unwrapped it. Within lay a glove, blue, soft, unmistakably the fellow to the one Holmes had observed in Miss Cole's room. "I found it upon the stage this morning, lodged beneath the limelight stand. I feared to speak lest suspicion fall upon me, but I could not keep it hidden." Holmes turned it over, noting a faint smear of chalk dust upon the palm. He did not return it at once, but laid it upon the table beside his lens. "You have done wisely, Mr. Dacre. Suspicion follows silence more surely than words. Now tell me, the woman you saw, can you swear it was Miss Cole?" Dacre hesitated. "I cannot swear it, sir. She was cloaked, and her face half-turned. I only thought, well, Maestro Cardini favoured her above the rest, and my mind supplied the likeness." Holmes inclined his head. "Your candour is commendable. Leave the glove with me. It may yet clear the innocent as well as condemn the guilty. You will hear from me further. For now, speak of this to no one." When Dacre had departed, Holmes stood regarding the glove with something like irritation. "So, Watson, our evidence multiplies, but certainty recedes. A glove at the theatre, a glove in her lodgings, either the simplest confirmation of guilt or the neatest plant imaginable. And this mysterious woman who visited Cardini. If it were Miss Cole, why deny her presence so firmly? If it were not, who plays her shadow? It may be, I ventured, that Cardini was entangled with more than one woman." "Ah, Watson, you touch the raw string. Cardini was Italian, temperamental, and gifted. It would be astonishing if he were not embroiled in affairs of the heart. But which heart is capable of murder? That is the point. I must test the contralto's account, and also learn what Sir Alister and Mr. Rooke have omitted to tell us. Their anxiety for reputation is too intense to be disinterested." He snatched his hat once more. "Come, Watson, we return to Bow Street. Tonight, the empty opera house will yield us its secrets, but we must look upon it not with the eyes of a constable, but with those of the actors who haunt its stage. Only then shall we discern who played the final scene with Maestro Cardini." As we descended to the cab, I could not but feel the tightening of the noose around some yet unseen figure, and the faint chill of the fog seemed to echo the hidden menace of the case. Holmes, for his part, was already humming a few bars of a melody I did not know. 3 short notes, then silence, repeated with a curious insistence, as if he tested how the score of death had been written. The cab deposited us once more at the stage door of the Royal Lyceum, where the fog had grown thicker, curling in long fingers about the gas lamps until they glowed like dull embers in a grate. The constable on duty admitted us without question, for Lestrade had left word that Mr. Sherlock Holmes was to be given every liberty. Within, the building seemed more desolate than before, the great echoing corridors as silent as catacombs. Holmes walked swiftly, his lantern swinging in his hand, until we stood upon the stage once more, looking out into the yawning dark of the empty house. "Watson," he said, lowering his voice as though the wooden saints painted on the cloister flats might overhear. "There is an advantage to be gained in studying a crime at its hour. The light, the stillness, the solitude, all are conspirators in truth. Here the maestro died between 5 and 6. Let us suppose ourselves back in that moment." He bade me sit at the conductor's stand, arranging my hands as though poised to beat time. Then he vanished into the wings, his footfalls eerily silent upon the boards. A pause. Then I heard his voice, muffled and distant. "Cardini is here, writing or marking his score. A woman enters, whether Miss Cole or another we shall yet learn. There is a dispute, an object passed, perhaps a message, perhaps a threat. Then what? Does she strike? No bruise, sufficient. Poison? Possibly, though no flask or vial was found. Or does a third party watch from the shadows, waiting for the quarrel to end before dealing the final stroke?" He emerged again, his lantern beam cutting across the dusted stage floor. He crouched to trace the faint outline of my shoe prints and those of the dead conductor. "Note it well, Watson. Cardini's steps are direct from the wings to the rostrum. No other prints intersect them, yet we have the thumb in the pit, the missing glove, the excised paper. Therefore, one of two things is true. Either the assassin moved with superhuman care, leaving no print upon the powdered boards, or he came from a place where prints do not declare themselves. The flies, I suggested. Just so. The realm of the electrician, the carpenter, the scene shifter. From above, one may watch unseen, a weight dropped, a cord drawn, a drugged draft lowered. It would leave the floor untouched. And our fragment of wax, Watson, left not by clumsy chance, but as trace of a screw adjusted upon the lamp frame. That is the mark of one who worked in the shadows overhead. At that moment, a door creaked in the wings and a beam of lamplight struck across the scenery. It was Rook, the impresario, with his habitual expression of worry carved deep into his lean features. "Mr. Holmes, you return at an uncanny hour," he said, striving for levity. "I scarce thought to find anyone here." "An opera house is never truly empty, Mr. Rook," Holmes replied smoothly. "Ghosts abound, but you, I trust, are of flesh and blood. What brings you here so late?" Rook shifted uneasily. "Papers, contracts. The season must continue, death or no death. Sir Alistair insists the public be reassured." Holmes fixed him with a gaze that made the man falter. "Reassurance is best bought with truth. Tell me, what was the relation between Maestro Cardini and Miss Cole?" Rook's lips compressed. He was infatuated, blind to her faults. She could scarce sing in tune, and yet he praised her as though she were Melba. "I warned him it would ruin our season. He laughed at me." "And so the board resented her advancement?" Holmes pressed. "Resented and feared it," Rook admitted. The chorus whispered. The other principals threatened to resign. But what could I do? He was maestro. The baton was his. Holmes inclined his head slightly, as though noting the bitterness beneath the words. "And yet, Mr. Rook, if Miss Cole be found guilty of his death, your difficulties vanish at a stroke. The season may proceed unblemished." Rook's face darkened. "You go too far, sir. I have devoted 20 years to this house. I would sooner hang myself from its rafters than see it stained with blood." He gathered his papers and withdrew in some agitation, leaving us once more alone in the cavernous dark. Holmes's eyes followed him until the echo of his steps died away. "Mark that, Watson. Too vehement a denial often rings truer than indifference. Rook's passion is real, but whether for innocence or concealment, we shall learn." He led me then into the pit where the thumbprint had been found. With his lantern low, he examined the wood again. "Observe the whorls, Watson, deliberate, pressed with care, not smudged as in accident. It is a message left for us or for another. And the initials N.C. Why inscribe them unless to cast suspicion? No criminal writes his own name at the scene of his crime." We climbed back to the stage, and Holmes paced again in silence. At last he said, "There remains one avenue, the cloak. Dacre saw a woman in a cloak, quarrelling with Cardini. We must learn if Miss Cole owns such a garment, or if another does, and if she does not, then the phantom visitor was not she, but another woman entirely. In that case, the initials N.C. may stand for someone else, or for something altogether different." "Another woman?" I repeated. "Why not? Cardini was a man of passions, an old liaison, a discarded rival, even some wronged relative. The theatre breeds dramas off-stage more furious than any upon it." He extinguished the lantern, plunging us into darkness. "Come, Watson, we have enough for tonight. Tomorrow we must speak with Miss Bell again. Copyists are discreet, but they hear much, and they sometimes see what others ignore." As we left the opera house, I glanced back at the stage where only moments before Holmes had reconstructed the maestro's final movements. Now it was swallowed in blackness, silent as a tomb. Yet in that silence I felt the presence of eyes unseen, as if some hidden watcher still lingered in the rafters. Holmes seemed to sense it too, for he drew his coat tighter and muttered in a tone that chilled me. "Someone has written a score of death, Watson, and we have heard only the first movement. The crescendo is yet to come." The following morning broke with that damp and pearly greyness which is the habitual temper of London. I found Holmes already astir, his long frame bent over the table where he had spread the opera score with its curious notations. A magnifying lens, his chemical set, and a sheaf of paper upon which he had drawn elaborate musical bars testified to the vigour of his industry through the small hours. He glanced up as I entered, his eyes burning with that peculiar brightness which always betrayed the imminence of discovery. "Good morning, Watson. I trust your rest was more profound than mine. I have wrestled with Maestro Cardini's hieroglyphs until dawn, and, though the precise key escapes me still, I am convinced we are dealing not with idle marginalia, but with a cipher of the gravest import. Consider that the 3 crosses above the staff. To a musician it is a triviality, but to a man pressed for secrecy it is a signal. Cardini left us a clue, though obscured, to the peril he foresaw." "You believe, then, that he knew himself to be in danger?" I asked. "Most assuredly. And what is more, he attempted to preserve evidence of it. The torn page we saw and the corresponding excision in Miss Cole's copy suggests he inscribed something too revealing to remain. Someone removed it to shield themselves, but not before Cardini had doubled his warning." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "It is always my rule, Watson, that the more elaborate the attempt to conceal, the greater the importance of what is concealed." At that instant, Mrs. Hudson entered with a card upon a salver. Holmes's brows lifted as he read it aloud. "Miss Thora Bell, she anticipates our summons." He bade her be shown up. The young copyist entered with a composure that belied her youth. Her grey eyes were steady, her manner plain, but I detected a faint nervousness beneath her civility. She greeted Holmes respectfully and accepted a chair. "You have returned of your own accord, Miss Bell," Holmes observed. "An unusual courtesy in one who has already been questioned." She coloured slightly. "I could not sleep, Mr. Holmes. Something I remembered troubled me, and I thought it best to tell you at once, lest silence bring harm." Holmes inclined his head. "Pray continue." "It concerns Maestro Cardini," she said, her voice low. "On the afternoon before he died, as I delivered the score, he drew me aside. He asked if I had noticed any errors or strange marks in the copies. I told him no, for I had written them faithfully. He then showed me one sheet, Act 2, the finale. In the margin he had written words in Italian which I could not translate. He tore it away quickly, thrust it into his coat, and bade me say nothing. He looked, oh, I cannot describe it, afraid, as though he feared someone might overhear, even in that empty hall. I thought no more of it until I learned he was dead." Holmes's eyes glittered. "Excellent, Miss Bell. You have done wisely. The page you saw torn away is the very one we found absent. Your testimony corroborates my suspicion that the excision was deliberate, not accidental." She hesitated, twisting her gloves. "There is one more thing. I do not know if it bears weight. I was returning through the corridor when I saw Sir Alistair Penmorrar in earnest talk with Mr. Rooke. They stopped when they saw me. Sir Alistair looked pale and angry. I caught the words, 'She must not be allowed to sing.' And then they broke off. I hurried away, for I am but a servant in such matters." Holmes leaned forward intently. "That is of the utmost importance. You will remain silent upon this, Miss Bell, until called upon. You may depend upon my protection." When she had gone, Holmes turned to me with animation. "You perceive, Watson, how the web thickens. We have now the maestro fearful, tearing away his own writing, the impresario and the patron conspiring in whispers about Miss Cole, a glove that wanders between theatre and lodging, and a mysterious visitor cloaked in secrecy. Each line converges, but not upon the obvious point. Our task is to trace them to their true centre." "And your course now?" I asked. "To pay Sir Alistair a morning call. He is not a man to wear fear lightly. If he trembled in his own opera house, then he knows more than he confesses." We repaired by cab to Sir Alistair's townhouse in Grosvenor Square. He received us in a library overhung with heavy draperies, his hands restless upon the arms of his chair. He affected indignation at Holmes's persistence, but the effort was hollow. "Sir Alistair," Holmes began without preamble, "Miss Bell reports that you and Mr. Rooke spoke yesterday of preventing Miss Cole from singing. Was that your intention?" The baronet started, colour rising to his mottled cheeks. "We spoke in confidence. The woman is a menace to the season, unfit to be thrust into prominence merely to satisfy Cardini's whim. That is all." Holmes's gaze hardened. "And yet Cardini pressed her forward despite your protests. You quarrelled with him?" Sir Alistair shifted uneasily. "We exchanged words, I confess it, but quarrels are not crimes. Must a patron fear the gallows because he sought to preserve the dignity of his stage?" Holmes's voice was quiet. "You will not be accused on my word alone, but let me advise candour, Sir Alistair. You have much to lose, and secrets weigh heavily when murder stalks their shadows." The baronet could not meet his eyes. He muttered something of reputations and ruin, then abruptly dismissed us, pleading indisposition. As we left, Holmes's expression was unreadable, but I sensed that he had drawn from the interview more than appeared. In the cab, he at last spoke. "Watson, our quarry is a master of misdirection. Each clue points to Miss Cole, yet each also reveals a hand that guides it there. The initials in the pit, the glove upon the stage, the excised page, all too convenient. We are meant to see her as guilty. Therefore she is not." "And if not she, then who?" I asked. "That, my dear fellow, is the heart of it. Tonight we shall return once more to the opera house, but not to search for scraps of paper. Tonight we must set a snare. The murderer believes the scene to be his own. Very well, we shall make it so, and see who dares to play the next act." Holmes was unusually taciturn throughout the day, his thoughts withdrawn into that private chamber where, I knew, the movements of the case were being rehearsed as if upon a chessboard. He busied himself with small domestic occupations, burning scraps of paper in the grate, examining the lenses of his magnifying glass, and pacing in abrupt bursts from window to fireplace and back again. I dared not interrupt, for I recognized the signs of a mind at its sharpest tension. By late afternoon he declared that we must dine early, for the night would belong to the theatre. At 9 o'clock we returned to Bow Street under cover of the fog, which lay heavy and low, as though conspiring in Holmes's plan. Lestrade awaited us at the stage door, his expression sour with reluctance. "I do not see, Mr. Holmes, what further can be done in this mausoleum," said he. "The inquest will call it accident, and the public will thank us for burying it quietly. I cannot be chasing phantoms all night to humour your theories." "Nevertheless, Inspector," Holmes replied with good-humoured patience, "you will humour me. If my theory fails, you may jeer at leisure. If it succeeds, you shall have your culprit by dawn." We entered by the green room and passed on to the stage, where the dim jets cast a sickly glow across the painted cloister. The vast emptiness of the house yawned before us, its darkness broken only by the faint glimmer of gas lamps in the corridor. Holmes instructed the constables to remain discreetly in the wings, while he, Lestrade, and I positioned ourselves upon the stage. "I have set the scene as nearly as possible to the conditions of Cardini's last hour," he said. "Watson, you shall once again take the conductor's post. Lestrade, conceal yourself in the box to the right. I shall remain visible, for visibility will tempt the hidden hand." We obeyed his instructions, and silence fell, broken only by the faint creak of the boards and the distant ticking of the hall clock. The atmosphere was oppressive, as though the theatre itself held its breath. Minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Then, faintly, from the direction of the flies above, came the whisper of a rope shifting. Holmes's eyes shot upward like a hawk's. "Do not move, Watson," he murmured. "The trap is baited." A faint glow appeared above the stage, near the limelight rig. It flickered as though adjusted by unseen hands. Holmes stepped slowly forward, his head tilted as if listening to some inaudible music. Suddenly a shadow detached itself from the rafters and descended along a ladder, pausing halfway. The dim light caught the outline of a cloaked figure. Holmes's voice rang clear and commanding. "You had best come down, madam, or sir. We are prepared." The figure froze, then darted back upward. In an instant, Holmes bounded across the stage with astonishing agility, clambered onto the rigging, and vanished into the dark above. I heard the scuffle of feet upon planks, the rattle of pulleys, and a sharp cry. A moment later, Holmes descended, his hand gripping the wrist of his captive. The cloak fell aside to reveal none other than Nerissa Cole, her dark hair dishevelled, her eyes glittering with fury. Lestrade sprang from his hiding place. "Ha! I knew it! I knew it from the first! Miss Cole, you are under arrest for the murder of Maestro Cardini." But Holmes held up his hand. "Not so fast, Lestrade. Appearances are once more the plaything of deception. We have caught Miss Cole indeed, but whether as murderess or as pawn remains to be seen. Do not bind her yet." She wrenched free, her voice low and bitter. "I had no choice but to come here." He left me a message, a page from his score instructing me to return tonight. I thought... Her voice broke, and she pressed her hands to her face. "I thought it was from him, though he was already dead." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "A page, you say? Where is it?" She drew from her cloak a folded slip of music paper. Holmes spread it under the lantern's glow. It was the missing fragment, the torn corner from Act 2. Upon it, in Cardini's hand, were scrawled words in Italian, "Non fidati di NC, trust not NC." Lestrade gave a triumphant snort. "There is the proof, plain as day. He wrote it with his dying hand. She is guilty." But Holmes's eyes glittered with a fiercer light. "Proof, Inspector? Proof of cunning, rather. Cardini, dying, would not write an accusation in initials alone. He would give a name, a word, something unambiguous. This message is a fabrication. Observe, the ink is fresh, not 3 days old, and the tear does not match the ragged edge we saw in the maestro's desk. Someone has forged this to incriminate Miss Cole, and then lured her here tonight to be found with it." Miss Cole lifted her head, her expression stricken but resolute. "I swear to you, Mr. Holmes, I am no murderer. I came only because I feared some dreadful truth lay hidden." Holmes nodded. "And in coming, you have served your purpose as decoy, but you shall also serve as witness. Remain with us, Miss Cole. The true hand will betray itself soon." He turned sharply to Lestrade. "Inspector, tighten your cordon. No one enters or leaves this house. The criminal is among those who have free access here. Rook, Dacre, Sir Alistair, or another of the staff. He believes himself clever enough to manipulate suspicion, but he has not reckoned with the persistence of light." Holmes struck a match and touched it to the gas jet at the center of the stage. The sudden flare drove the shadows back, illuminating the painted cloister in stark relief. "Tonight, Watson, we perform the finale of Cardini's unfinished work. Our audience is the guilty man, and I intend that his applause shall be the clink of handcuffs." As he spoke, a faint sound drifted from the wings, a door creaking shut too hastily. Holmes's smile was thin as a blade. "Ah, the overture has begun. Now let us see who dares to play the next note." Holmes did not stir for several moments, his gaze fixed upon the shadowy wings where the door had betrayed its hasty closing. His head was slightly inclined, like a hound that scents the breeze, and his long fingers beat a noiseless rhythm upon his coat. At last he whispered to me, "You heard, Watson? A hand too anxious, too hasty. Our quarry is close." Lestrade motioned to one of his men to slip silently into the corridor, but Holmes arrested him with a quick gesture. "No, if you chase a fox too loudly, it bolts and vanishes into the night. We must coax him into showing his tail." He turned back to the stage where Miss Cole stood pale and trembling, the forged paper clutched still in her hand. "Courage, madam," said Holmes with a gentleness I had rarely heard in his voice. "You have been made a pawn, but now you may be the very piece that turns the game. Remain where you are and speak as if confiding in me alone. Someone is listening, and he must hear what he wishes to hear." She looked at him in startled comprehension, then lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mr. Holmes, I swear I never harmed Maestro Cardini. Yet there is one who pressed me to use his influence, one who insisted I give him favors in exchange for advancement." She paused, and though her words were true enough in essence, I realized she now embroidered them in obedience to Holmes's strategy. "If I speak his name, will it bring ruin?" Holmes inclined his head solemnly. "Speak it nonetheless." She drew a breath. "It was Mr. Rook." The name rang out in the theatre like the note of a struck bell. At once a sharp cry echoed from the corridor, followed by the scrape of hurried footsteps. Lestrade darted towards the sound, but Holmes was quicker. He had already leapt from the stage, his long limbs carrying him in 2 strides to the passage beyond. I followed, my revolver in hand. We burst into the corridor just as a figure collided with one of the constables, struggling with furious desperation. In the scuffle, a bundle slipped from his coat and scattered across the floor, pages of music, some torn, some scrawled, with Cardini's hand. Holmes seized the fellow by the collar and wrenched him round. It was indeed Fabian Rook, the impresario. His face was livid, his eyes wild, with the fury of one who sees his careful fabrications collapse. "You fools!" he spat, as Lestrade clapped irons on his wrists. "You blind fools! You ruin everything! I meant only to save the season. Without Cardini, without that Italian charlatan, we might yet have prospered." Holmes bent to gather the fallen papers. He held up one fragment, the edges jagged where it had been excised from a score. "And so you tore away his warning, and forged another to cast suspicion on Miss Cole. You planted her glove upon the stage, you scrawled her initials in the pit, you even lured her here tonight, hoping to see her condemned. You played upon her ambition, knowing how readily the world believes a woman guilty of passion. It was a clever performance, Rook, but not clever enough." Rook's face twisted. "You cannot prove I struck him down. There was no wound, no weapon. Let them call it an accident, and I shall walk free." Holmes's eyes shone with the cold fire I had seen when he faced adversaries most dangerous. "An accident?" "No, Rook. Cardini was poisoned. The bruise upon his temple was the mere after-effect of collapse. I found, upon examining his lips under the glass, a faint dusting of white, the residue of a bitter alkaloid. You, who arranged the limelights, dusted his score with the substance, knowing his habit of wetting his finger as he turned the pages. He ingested death bar by bar, and you watched from the flies as the music carried him to silence. That was your method, and the wax fragment we found betrayed your tampering with the lamp at the very spot where you concealed the drug. A collective shudder passed through those present. Even Lestrade, hardened by years of crime, looked shaken. Rook sagged against his captors, his bravado failing. "It was not murder," he muttered hoarsely. "It was necessity. He would have ruined us all with that woman. The board demanded it. The baronet himself pressed me to act." Holmes's expression hardened to iron. "You may tell your tale to the court, sir, but I think you will find little sympathy there. Sir Alister may have whispered of his discontent, but it was you who fashioned whispers into death." Rook was led away, still protesting, while Holmes carefully pocketed the incriminating pages. Miss Cole, white as marble, stood upon the stage, watching the scene with wide, stricken eyes. Holmes approached her and bowed with grave courtesy. "Madam, your innocence is clear. You were made the victim of a plot as vile as it was cunning. You may take comfort in the knowledge that justice will not mistake your hand for another's." She sank into a chair, overcome, while Lestrade turned to Holmes with reluctant admiration. "Well, Mr. Holmes, I cannot deny you've played the tune to its end. I had her in bracelets before you spoke a word, but I see now you were right to hold me back. I shall not forget it." Holmes gave a thin smile. "The truth, Inspector, is like an opera. It demands patience, or else the final note is lost. And tonight we have heard the last chord clearly." He took my arm then, leading me away from the stage as the constables busied themselves with their prisoner. "Come, Watson. The night has been long, and the air here is foul with deceit. A pipe at Baker Street will clear the taste. The rest is for the magistrates." As we stepped out into the cold fog of Bow Street, I reflected upon the strange theatre we had witnessed, a stage where love, ambition, and envy had played their parts with fatal consequence. Yet above them all there had stood the solitary figure of my friend, the true conductor, guiding each discordant note towards the harmony of truth. The following day dawned bleak and sodden, the fog of the night before having yielded to a cold drizzle that pattered upon the panes of Baker Street with a dreary persistence. I found Holmes at his accustomed place by the fire, a cigarette between his long fingers, and before him on the table lay the scattered remnants of the score we had recovered from Rook's coat. He looked up at me as I entered, his features pale, but his eyes alight with the peculiar intensity that always accompanied the unravelling of a case. "Ah, Watson," said he, tapping the ash delicately into the grate, "we are upon the cusp of resolution, yet the matter is not complete. Rook stands revealed as a plotter, yes, and his hand undoubtedly administered the poison, but you recall, no doubt, his protest that he acted under the pressure of the board, and in particular under the influence of Sir Alister Penmorah." "I do," said I gravely. "And though I am inclined to believe that Rook sought to justify his crime by shifting blame, I cannot entirely dismiss the baronet's agitation. He was ill at ease, even in our first meeting." Holmes nodded. "Precisely. His conduct betrays a knowledge of the affair deeper than he confesses. To ignore it would be to leave the play unfinished. Consider, too, the forged fragment. Who besides Rook might profit by ensuring suspicion fell squarely upon Miss Cole? Rook desired her removal, yes, but there is something more. The words scrawled in Italian, "Trust not NC," were too deliberate, too theatrical. It smacks of one who understands the drama of a false accusation. I asked whether Holmes believed Sir Alister himself might have assisted in the deception. Holmes exhaled a thin stream of smoke. "He's not a man to soil his hands with poison powder, Watson." Yet his purse and influence may well have encouraged Rook. It is often so in crime. One provides the motive, the other the means. What remains is to determine the exact division of guilt. At that moment a knock sounded, and Mrs. Hudson entered with a note. Holmes tore it open and passed it to me. It was from Lestrade, written in his spidery hand. "Rook refuses confession, but insists he is no murderer. He claims Sir Alistair demanded Cardini's removal at any cost. Requests you attend Newgate for further questioning. Lestrade." Holmes sprang to his feet. "Excellent! The bird sings in his cage, though whether he trills truth or falsehood remains to be heard. Come, Watson, we shall visit Mr. Rook in his new quarters." The grim walls of Newgate received us with their usual gloom. Rook was brought into the interview room, his wrists still shackled, but his expression strangely composed. Gone was the frantic fury of the night before. He looked weary, almost relieved, as though the burden of secrecy had grown heavier than the iron upon his arms. Holmes greeted him curtly. "Well, Mr. Rook, the masquerade is over. You played your part ably, but the stage has closed. Now tell us, was it truly your hand alone that struck down the maestro, or were you but the actor in another man's play?" Rook's lips twisted. "I will not deny my hand mixed the poison, but I swear, upon my soul, it was not my design. Sir Alistair gave the word. He bade me remove Cardini before the opening night, else the patronage, the funding, all would collapse. I sought only to obey." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And yet it was you who planted the false clues to incriminate Miss Cole?" "Yes," Rook cried, leaning forward. "I did it to save myself. I thought, if suspicion fell upon her, Sir Alistair would be satisfied, and I would escape the noose, but he promised me protection. He swore no law would touch me, that his influence would shield me." His voice broke into bitterness. "But where is he now? He lets me rot while he dines in Grosvenor Square." Holmes regarded him coldly. "A desperate man's plea, perhaps, but one not without plausibility. Very well, Mr. Rook, we shall examine it." He rose abruptly, motioning me to follow. "Thank you for your candour. I do not think you will escape justice, but you may yet compel another to join you there." Outside the prison, Holmes hailed a cab. "To Grosvenor Square," he commanded. "It is time Sir Alistair answered questions without the shelter of his library." We were admitted to the baronet's house after some delay, and he received us in a drawing-room richly adorned yet oppressive in its gloom. His hands trembled slightly as he poured wine for us, though he declined to drink himself. Holmes wasted no courtesy. "Sir Alistair, Rook has spoken. He declares you urged him to remove Cardini. He names you as the instigator of his crime." The baronet's face blanched, then flushed crimson. "Lies, desperate lies of a condemned man. I may have quarrelled with Cardini, yes, I sought to restrain his infatuation with that woman, but murder? To demand such a thing? Preposterous." Holmes's gaze was steady as steel. "Then perhaps you will explain this." From his pocket he produced one of the torn fragments recovered from Rook's coat. On its margin, written not in Cardini's flowing Italian hand, but in bold English script, were the words, "Deliver by Wednesday or face ruin. A.P." Sir Alistair's eyes widened in horror. He staggered to his feet. "It is a forgery," he cried hoarsely. "I never wrote it. I never—" His protest faltered, and his voice sank to a whisper. "I only meant to frighten him. He would have destroyed the opera with his caprices. I thought a threat would sober him. I did not dream Rook would carry it so far." Holmes's expression softened not at all. You provided the spark, Sir Alistair. Rook the tinder. Together, you kindled the fire that consumed Cardini. You may plead ignorance of the method, but not of the intent. The law will determine your share of the guilt. The baronet sank heavily into his chair, his head in his hands. For a long moment there was silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then Holmes rose. "Come, Watson, our work here is nearly done. Lestrade will take what remains of the play to its conclusion. The jury shall decide whether Sir Alistair's threats make him accomplice or coward, but either way the opera house is cleansed of its phantom." As we stepped once more into the rain-slicked streets, I glanced at my companion. His profile was stern, his lips compressed in thought. "You look dissatisfied, Holmes," I ventured. He gave a short laugh without mirth. "Dissatisfied? Perhaps. We have unmasked the actors, but I cannot help but feel the true author of the tragedy remains elusive. Cardini feared something more than the schemes of patrons and impresarios. There is still a missing bar in this score, Watson, and until I hear it played, the music remains incomplete." Holmes and I walked in silence for some time, the rain clattering upon the cab's roof as we rattled away from Grosvenor Square. I could not help but feel a certain weariness. We had seen Rook taken in irons, and Sir Alistair half crushed by Holmes's unflinching revelation of his threats. To me it seemed the play was finished. Yet Holmes sat with his chin sunk upon his chest, his long fingers interlaced, and his eyes narrowed in thought. His whole attitude betrayed a restlessness that I knew too well. He was not content. At length he stirred, striking the side of the cab to rouse the driver. "Back to Baker Street, Watson. There is more to this affair than lies upon the surface. Rook may be in prison, Sir Alistair in disgrace, but Cardini's fear was deeper than the quarrels of managers and patrons. You recall Miss Bell's testimony that Cardini tore away a page, scribbled words in Italian, and looked about him as though pursued by shadows. Such fear is not born of artistic disputes. I reflected upon this and nodded. You think, then, there is another presence in the matter? Not think, Watson. No. When Rook cried that Sir Alistair bade him act, it rang true to the measure of a desperate man. But when the baronet faltered, confessing to threats, yet disclaiming murder, I felt the discord still unresolved. Both men spoke truth and falsehood mingled. That is the signature of manipulation. The hand behind this affair has set its puppets dancing and now hopes to vanish before the final curtain. We reached Baker Street, and Holmes went at once to his desk. He spread out the score fragments under the lamp and examined them with his glass. He beckoned me close. Observe here, Watson. Cardini's hand is bold, flowing, Italianate. Rook's scrawl is hasty in English. But here, see this line, written in a cramped, angular style, non fidati di NC. It does not match Cardini's script at all. It is an imitation. Someone forged it, not only to implicate Miss Cole, but to conceal their own initials within the deception. I bent to look. Then who, Holmes, if NC is false? What does it signify? Holmes's eyes gleamed. It is a substitution, a veil. The true hand is concealed by those very letters. NC. Not Nerissa Cole, but perhaps another name altogether. Or not a name, but a designation. Consider, who among the company bears those initials? None, save Miss Cole. Yet the opera world is wide, and there are others behind the scenes whose names we have not weighed. We must broaden our scope. As if summoned by his words, there came a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson admitted Miss Bell once more. Pale and anxious, she clasped a folded sheet of music to her breast. Mr. Holmes, forgive my intrusion. I thought the matter done, but this morning as I tidied my workroom, I found this, slipped between the copies. It is in the maestro's hand. I feared it was nothing, but after what you told me, I dared not keep it back." Holmes received the sheet with eagerness. He spread it under the lamplight, and together we bent over it. The bars of music were ordinary enough, but in the margin, Cardini had written in Italian, "L'ombra canta dal corde." Holmes translated aloud, "The shadow sings from the ropes." He leaned back, his expression sharpened. "Watson, the ropes, the flies." Cardini feared one who moved among the rigging, unseen above the stage. That is no patron, no impresario. That is the domain of the stage carpenters and electricians. "Dacre," I whispered, the name leaping to my mind. Holmes gave a tight nod. "Precisely. Dacre, the electrician who alone had keys, who adjusted lamps, who could dust a score unnoticed while tending his limelights. He gave us his tale of seeing a woman in a cloak, but what if that tale was his screen? He named Miss Cole not from certainty, but because he had already laid the ground for suspicion to fall upon her. And he brought us her glove. What simpler trick than to place it where only he might discover it? A most obliging witness, too obliging by half. I sat back, stunned. Then Rook, for all his guilt, was but another pawn? Holmes's lips curved in that cold smile of triumph. "A willing pawn, yes, but one manipulated. Dacre supplies the means, the poison, the lamp, the rigging. Rook supplies the motive, fear of ruin. Sir Alistair supplies the pressure, threats, and purse. Each believes himself acting alone, but above them moves the electrician, the shadow in the ropes, guiding their steps and planting false trails. And it was Dacre who handed me the glove, his supposed conscience tormenting him. A neat piece of stagecraft. He wished to appear useful, yet all the while he steered suspicion where he wished it to go." Miss Bell shivered. "But why, Mr. Holmes? Why should Dacre wish Cardini dead?" Holmes's voice grew grim. "That we must discover. But I warrant you there is some deeper tie, perhaps blackmail, perhaps vengeance. We shall not speculate idly. Instead, we shall return to the opera tonight and confront him upon his own battlements. The shadow that sings from the ropes must be made to descend." The hour being late, Holmes dismissed Miss Bell with assurances of protection. Then he turned to me with sudden vigour. "Watson, this case is a symphony of deception. Each note, each bar has been carefully arranged. Tonight we shall hear the coda. Bring your revolver. Dacre is desperate, and desperation makes a man dangerous." As I prepared, I could not help but marvel at the relentless logic that had brought Holmes to this new revelation. Only the night before, I had thought the matter concluded with Rook's arrest. Yet here was Holmes sweeping aside the veil of falsehood and uncovering the true conductor of the deadly score. I felt again the old thrill, the mingled dread and admiration of being drawn with him to the edge of revelation. When at last we stepped into the damp London night, bound once more for Bow Street, Holmes's eyes gleamed through the fog. "The Opera House awaits its final act, Watson, and tonight the hidden hand shall take the stage." The fog was heavier that night than on any previous occasion, muffling the lamps along Bow Street until they glowed like half-smothered coals. Our cab set us down before the Opera House, its façade looming dark and silent against the mist. Holmes alighted with that swift energy which in him marked the final tightening of a case. He spoke scarcely a word as we entered by the stage door, the constable on duty recognizing us at once and standing aside. Within, the building was as chill and hollow as a mausoleum. The air smelled of dust and old paint, mingled with the faint metallic tang of the limelights. Holmes paused upon the stage, gazing upward into the cavern of ropes, pulleys and beams that formed the flies. "There is our theatre of shadows, Watson," he murmured. It was from above that Dacre orchestrated his illusions. He poisoned the score, watched Cardini fall, and contrived the false clues to misdirect us. But every conductor must face his audience in the end. We concealed ourselves in the wings, Holmes directing Lestrade and 2 constables to remain silent and ready. Miss Cole, though terrified, had agreed to return once more at Holmes's request. She sat upon a stage chair, pale and tense, serving as bait. I confess my heart ached to see her drawn again into the perilous masquerade. Yet Holmes had insisted her presence was necessary to unmask the true villain. The building settled into silence, save for the faint drip of water in the gutters outside. Then, precisely as Holmes had foreseen, the creak of a ladder sounded faintly from the darkness above. A dim glow appeared high in the rigging, and the outline of a man descended part way, a tool clutched in his hand. It was Henry Dacre. "Mr. Dacre," Holmes's voice rang out, clear and commanding across the stage, "you had best come down. The performance is over." The electrician froze, his lantern swinging in his grasp. For a heartbeat he seemed poised to descend peaceably, but then, with startling swiftness, he flung the lantern to the stage. Shattered in sparks, and he scrambled upward into the ropes like some desperate animal. "Quickly, Watson!" Holmes bounded for the rigging, his long limbs carrying him aloft with astonishing agility. I followed to the foot of the ladder, revolver in hand, but dared not climb for fear of hindering him. Above I heard the scramble of boots upon planks, the rattle of pulleys, the hiss of ropes sliding across wood. Holmes's voice cut through the darkness. "Dacre, you poisoned Cardini, you planted the glove, you forged the note. Your theatre of lies is ended. Will you descend like a man, or must I drag you down like a rat from the beams?" A hoarse shout answered him. "You know nothing, Holmes. Cardini destroyed me long before I struck him. He stole my wife, my life. Did you think I would not repay him in kind?" His words carried an unhinged fury that chilled me. I saw him then, outlined against a faint glow of gaslight, reaching for a rope. Holmes leapt forward. There was a struggle, the sound of wood splintering, then a cry as Dacre slipped. For an instant his figure swung in the air, clinging to the rope with desperate strength. Holmes seized him by the collar and dragged him back onto the platform, pinning him until Lestrade and his men clambered up to secure him in irons. They brought him down to the stage, where the wreckage of the shattered lantern still smouldered. His face was pale, his eyes wild, yet there was a grim satisfaction upon his lips. "I do not repent," he spat. "Cardini deserved his end. He thought himself untouchable, but he had broken lives behind him. I gave him justice." Holmes regarded him coldly. "Justice is not dealt by poison upon a page. You murdered not from duty, but from bitterness, and in cloaking your crime with false accusations, you sought not justice but escape." Dacre laughed harshly, but when Lestrade's men led him away, his bravado faltered, leaving him a hollow shell of the man he had seemed. Miss Cole wept silently in her chair, overwhelmed with relief as the weight of suspicion lifted from her. Holmes touched my arm. "Come, Watson, our work is finished here. The rest belongs to the law." We returned to Baker Street in the small hours of the morning, the fog thinning as dawn approached. Holmes flung himself into his chair, the violin lying ready beside him. He drew the bow across the strings, producing a melancholy phrase that lingered in the air. At length he lowered the instrument and looked across at me. "You see, Watson, how the symphony resolved itself. Rook, Sir Alistair, even Miss Cole, they were but instruments, each playing the notes dictated by the true conductor, hidden in the ropes. Dacre composed the final act, and Cardini paid the price. It is ever thus. The most dangerous enemy is not the figure in the limelight, but the shadow above the stage. I could not help but remark upon the strange tragedy of it all. And yet, Holmes, I cannot but pity even the
villain. He was driven by betrayal, by jealousy, by the ruin of his home. Holmes's expression softened for a moment, though his voice remained cool. Pity, if you wish, my dear fellow, but never confuse pity with excuse. Many men are wronged, but few turn murderers. The stage is set with choices. Dacre chose the darkest role. The fire crackled in the grate, and outside the first faint light of morning touched the mist. Holmes rose and laid his violin aside. Now, Watson, let us consign this opera to its close. I dare say by tomorrow the public will read of nothing more than an unfortunate accident followed by an arrest. But we shall know that behind the curtain another score was written, one that spoke of vengeance, deception, and death. And perhaps in the quiet of our sitting room we may yet find solace in simpler pursuits until London calls us once again to unravel its enigmas. Thus ended the strange case of the murder in the empty opera house, a drama of shadows and false notes, in which the final chord belonged not to the maestro who wielded the baton, but to the detective who discerned the hand that sought to silence him. And as I laid down my pen that morning, I could not help but feel anew the awe I had so often known, that Sherlock Holmes, with his piercing logic and unyielding spirit, had once more brought harmony out of chaos and truth out of darkness. The trial of Henry Dacre was swift and decisive, for the evidence Holmes had laid before the court admitted of no escape. The poisoned dust upon the score, the fragment of wax, the glove cunningly planted, the forged accusation, all were traced to his hand. His confession, wrung from him when he realized there could be no retreat from Holmes's deductions, sealed his fate. Rook, for his part, was sentenced to a long imprisonment as an accessory to the crime, his ambition and cowardice having made him pliant in the murderer's scheme. Sir Alistair Penmora's name was blackened, his patronage of the opera withdrawn, and though the law spared him the dock, society did not spare him disgrace. Miss Nerissa Cole returned to her lodgings acquitted of all suspicion, though her career never quite recovered from the shadow cast by those dreadful days. She sang but briefly again before withdrawing from the stage altogether, her ambition smothered by the bitter knowledge of how near she had come to ruin through another's malice. Miss Thora Bell, the quiet copyist, continued her honest labour, her testimony having proved a slender but vital thread in the unravelment of the skein. One evening, not long after, as we sat together by the fire in Baker Street, I remarked upon the curious symmetry of the case. "It began with a score of music," said I, "and it ended with the exposure of a score more sinister, the score of vengeance played out by a man hidden in the ropes." Holmes smiled faintly, the smoke of his cigarette curling in the lamplight. "You put it well,
Watson." It was indeed a composition, each movement carefully arranged, the poisoned page as the prelude, the planted glove as the rising motif, the forged note as the discordant climax, and at last the confession as the final chord. But remember this, it was not genius that unmasked Dacre, but error. He forged too much, planted too neatly. A criminal who relies on artifice leaves a trail of artifice behind him. I could not help but admire his clarity. And yet, I said, I wonder whether justice has served any true harmony here. A man lies dead, another condemned, reputations shattered. Even you, Holmes, seem less satisfied than usual. He regarded the fire for a long moment before answering, perhaps because the case was not born of calculation alone, but of passion, jealousy, betrayal, bitterness. Cold reason can explain it, Watson, but it cannot make it less tragic. Still, In exposing it, we prevent the lie from triumphing, and that, in its own way, is music enough. He reached for his violin then and drew the bow across the strings. A gentle, mournful air filled the room, not unlike the faint echoes I remembered from the empty opera house. Yet, as the melody rose and fell, I felt that it carried with it not only sorrow but also resolution, the closing of a performance. And so the curtain fell upon the murder in the empty opera house, another of those singular dramas that made me marvel afresh at the intellect of my companion. For though London teemed with shadows and intrigue, I knew that so long as Sherlock Holmes lived at Baker Street, there would always be one mind capable of bringing light into the darkest corners and order into the most discordant score.